The crystalline spires of the conquered dot chamber rose like frozen screams. Against the amber sky of Nexus Prime, their surfaces reflecting the dying light of 3 suns. Within those walls, the fate of 17 civilizations hung in the balance. An ambassador Viridian Kessler knew that humanity's voice would likely be the last they ever heard. The human delegation will now present their final testimony, announced HFY. Their voice a harmonic blend that made the chamber's acoustic crystals hum in resonance. The massive aliens for arms gestured dismissively, chitinous plates, clicking with contempt, though I suspect it will prove as futile as their previous performances. Kessler stood, her modest frame dwarfed by the towering representatives of the galactic conquered dot. Around the circular chamber, beings of impossible diversity loomed over her, the crystalline Veilthier with their singing nervous systems, the metallic Kron, whose bodies were living weapons, the ethereal Frenari who existed partially in dimensions beyond normal perception. Each species commanded fleets that could glass worlds, armies that had conquered star systems. Humanity controlled 12 colonies and a handful of outdated ships. The charges were fabricated. Of course, humanity hadn't committed genocide against the Tilthrani. They defended themselves. When the insectoid species had attempted to devour every living thing on 3 human worlds. But the conquered dot's justice was a careful theater, and humanity had been cast as the villain in this cosmic play. Honored members of the conquered dot, Kessler began, her voice steady despite the weight of extinction pressing down on her species. We stand accused of crimes we did not commit, judged by laws we had no voice in creating. A ripple of harsh laughter echoed from the Dwarvian delegation, their segmented forms clicking in amusement. The prey species speaks of justice, hissed their leader, Nexus Prime Valdris. How quaint. Kessler had prepared speeches, evidence, testimony from survivors. She'd spent months crafting humanity's defense, knowing that logic and law would be their only weapons against the assembled might of the galaxy. But as she looked up at the faces, or what passed for faces, of humanity's judges, she saw something that made her heart sink. They weren't listening. They'd already decided. The Tilthrani queen, HFY, rose from her organic throne, her carapace gleaming like polished obsidian. The human spawn poison my broods, she chittered, mandibles spreading to reveal rows of crystalline teeth. They used weapons that turned my children's own biology against them. Such cruelty demands creative punishment. It was a lie. The humans had developed biological countermeasures only after the Tilthrani had begun digesting human colonists alive, processing them into nutrients for their expanding hives. But truth was irrelevant here. The conquered dot wanted humanity gone, and the Tilthrani had provided the perfect excuse. The evidence is clear, HFY declared, their harmonic voice building to a crescendo that made the chamber walls sing. Humanity stands guilty of genocide, biological warfare, and crimes against sapience. The penalty is extinction, swift, complete, and absolute. Kessler felt the weight of 4 billion souls pressing down on her shoulders. Every human alive, every child playing in the gardens of New Eden, every scientist pursuing knowledge in the laboratories of Kepler Station, every artist painting beauty on the walls of Mars Colony, all of them condemned by this mockery of justice. But as she stood there, surrounded by the aliens who would order her species' destruction, something stirred in Kessler's memory, a fragment of Earth's history, a story her grandmother used to tell about the power of a single voice to move mountains. The chamber fell silent, waiting for humanity's final words before the sentence was carried out. Kessler looked up at the assembled powers of the galaxy. These beings who commanded stellar fleets and wielded technologies beyond human comprehension. They expected her to beg, to plead for mercy that would never come. Instead, she began to sing. The first note that escaped Kessler's lips was barely a whisper, a human lullaby her grandmother had hummed during the dark years after the climate wars. The conquered dot representatives stirred restlessly, confusion rippling through their ranks like wind through wheat. What is this mockery? Nexus Prime Valdris demanded, his segmented form rising from his delegation's platform. The prey species dares to vocalize at us, but Kessler continued, her voice growing stronger, more confident. The song was Andromois Enit, one of humanity's oldest surviving melodies, carried from Earth's Greek islands through the centuries. Few in the chamber would know its origins, but every human alive knew its meaning, the story of a small people who refused to surrender against impossible odds. The Frenari delegation began to shimmer, their partially dimensional forms flickering between states of existence. Fascinating, whispered their speaker, Luminthus, her voice like wind chimes in a stellar storm. The human's vocal emissions are creating harmonic resonances in the chamber's acoustic matrix. Indeed, the crystalline walls were beginning to respond to Kessler's song. The Veilthier, whose nervous systems were composed of living crystal, started to twitch and hum involuntarily. Their chorus leader, Resonance Keeper Sylph, clutched at her translucent chest as unauthorized harmonics began pulsing through her body. "Cease this disruption immediately," Arch-and-Quelix commanded, their forearms weaving complex patterns of authority. But their own harmonic voice was being interfered with, caught in the growing web of acoustic feedback that Kessler's song was creating. Kessler's voice soared higher, finding the chamber's resonant frequency through pure human intuition. She wasn't a trained singer, she was a diplomat, a negotiator who had spent her life reading the subtle cues of alien psychology. But right now, she was channeling something deeper than training, the raw, desperate creativity that had carried humanity from caves to stars. The Kron delegation's metallic forms began to vibrate, their living metal bodies responding to frequencies they'd never encountered. War Commander Thexmer, whose body was a walking arsenal, found his weapon systems malfunctioning as harmonics disrupted his neural networks. Impossible, he growled, his voice distorting as internal systems fought against the acoustic interference. But it was the Tilthrani Queen who reacted most violently. Heshkaleth's chitinous form convulsed as the song's frequencies found the harmonic resonance of her hive mind connections. Her species communicated through bioacoustic patterns embedded in their carapace's patterns that Kessler's song was beginning to interfere with. "Stop her," the queen shrieked, her mandibles spreading wide in panic. "The human spawn is disrupting the song of the hive." The chamber erupted into chaos. The Dwarvian guards moved first, their segmented forms flowing like liquid mercury toward Kessler's position. But the Frenary delegation, caught between dimensions, began to phase in and out of reality as the acoustic interference destabilized their quantum states. Kessler kept singing, even as the alien guards approached. The song was no longer just a melody, it was becoming something more, something that touched the fundamental harmonics of the chamber itself. The acoustic crystals that formed the walls began to glow, their stored energy patterns disrupted by frequencies no alien throat could produce. A Dwarvian guard reached for her, but as his clawed hand made contact, he recoiled in shock. The harmonic field surrounding Kessler was charged with energy from the responding crystals, creating a barrier of pure sound that physical matter could barely penetrate. "Sorcery," Nexus Prime Valdris accused, his form writhing as his own bioacoustic organs struggled against the interference. "The human spawn practices forbidden harmonics," but Luminthus, the Frenary speaker, was studying the phenomenon with growing amazement. Her partially dimensional senses could perceive what the others missed. The song wasn't just acoustic. It was creating ripples in the quantum foam itself, touching the fundamental frequencies that held reality together. "Not sorcery," she whispered, her wine chime voice barely audible above the chaos. "Evolution. The humans have developed something we never imagined possible." The Veilthier delegation was in full harmonic distress now, their crystalline forms pulsing with uncontrolled frequencies. Resonance Keeper Sylph was on her knees, trying desperately to filter out the human song from her consciousness, but it was everywhere, in the walls, in the air, in the quantum fabric of space itself. Arch-and-Quelix raised all four arms, attempting to restore order through their own harmonic authority. But their voice, which had commanded the respect of 17 civilizations, was being drowned out by a single human woman singing an ancient song of defiance. "Guards," the Archon bellowed, abandoning harmonics for raw volume. "Silence the human, by any means necessary." The Kron War Commander stepped forward, his metallic form shifting into a more aggressive configuration. Weapon ports opened along his arms, preparing to end Kessler's song with lethal force. But as he took aim, something impossible happened. The chamber's walls sang back. The crystalline walls of the conquered chamber had become a symphony of destruction. Every surface that had been designed to channel and amplify the harmonious voices of galactic civilization was now resonating with humanity's oldest song of defiance. The acoustic crystals, some as tall as buildings, began to crack under the strain of frequencies they'd never been designed to handle. Kessler's voice rose above the chaos, no longer just singing, but becoming something more, a conduit for every human voice that had ever refused to surrender. Her grandmother's lullabies merged with the work songs of the asteroid miners, the battle hymns of the colonial defense corps, the quiet prayers of families huddled in shelters during the Tilthrani raids. War Commander the XMER's targeting system screamed warnings as his weapon ports jammed shut. The harmonic interference was rewriting the quantum signatures of his living metal body, turning his own biology against him. Inconceivable, he growled, his voice distorting as internal systems fought for control. No organic species should be capable of this level of harmonic manipulation, but the Frenary speaker, Lumenthus, was seeing deeper truths through her multi-dimensional perception. The human song wasn't just affecting matter, it was touching the quantum strings that held the universe together, creating resonances in the fundamental forces themselves. She's not manipulating harmonics, Lumenthus whispered, her whine chime, voice carrying an edge of terror. She's awakening them. The humans, they've evolved beyond our understanding. The Tilthrani queen writhed in agony as the song disrupted her hive mind connections. Centuries of bioacoustic evolution had made her species dependent on harmonic communication, and Kessler's voice was jamming every frequency they used. Impossible, Heskeleth shrieked, her mandibles clicking frantically. The human spawn cannot sing the forbidden frequencies. Arch and Quelix's forearms wove increasingly desperate patterns. As they tried to reassert control, their harmonic authority, which had maintained order in the Concordat for 3,000 years, was being systematically dismantled by a single human voice. This is madness, the Archon declared, their crystalline faceplates beginning to crack under harmonic stress. No species can survive exposure to the deep resonance. But Kessler was more than surviving, she was thriving. Each note she sang seemed to unlock new possibilities, new frequencies that touched the hidden harmonies of creation itself. Her human brain, evolved for pattern recognition and creative problem-solving, was instinctively finding the acoustic keys to forces the galaxy's greatest minds had declared impossible to access. The Dwarvian guards pressed forward despite the harmonic barriers, their segmented forms adapting to the acoustic interference through sheer evolutionary stubbornness. But as they closed in on Kessler, the chamber's response intensified. Crystalline formations that had stood for millennia began to resonate so violently that they shattered, sending deadly shards flying through the air. Nexus Prime Valdra's dove for cover as a crystal spear the size of a tree trunk crashed where he'd been standing. Destroy her, he commanded, his bioacoustic organs bleeding from the harmonic assault. Before she brings down the entire structure. The Veilthir delegation was in complete collapse, their crystalline nervous systems, designed to process and transmit harmonic information, were overloading from exposure to Kessler's song. Resonance Keeper self-convulsed on the floor, her translucent body flickering between solid and energy states as she fought to maintain coherence. She's found the creation frequency, Sylph gasped, her voice barely recognizable through the harmonic distortion. The humans, they carry the song that built the universe itself through the chaos. Kessler could see the truth in their alien faces. They weren't just afraid of her voice, they were afraid of what it represented. Humanity had stumbled upon something that the galaxy's oldest civilizations had spent eons trying to understand, the fundamental harmony that held reality together. But with that realization came a terrible understanding. The song she was singing, the frequency she was unlocking, they were beyond the ability of any single throat to contain. She could feel her vocal cords beginning to tear, taste blood in her mouth as the harmonic forces threatened to destroy her from within. Yet she continued, because she understood now what was at stake. This wasn't just about humanity's survival, it was about the future of consciousness itself. The Concordat civilizations had grown stagnant, their evolution stalled by their own technological dependence, but humanity, still young and flexible, still capable of growth and change, represented something they'd forgotten, the possibility of transcendence. The chamber's walls began to glow with increasing intensity as the acoustic crystals reached critical resonance. Emergency systems activated throughout the structure, trying desperately to contain the harmonic cascade that threatened to spread beyond the council chamber into the city beyond. Evacuate the sector, Arch and Quelix commanded, their authority finally breaking through the acoustic chaos. Full containment protocols, nothing must escape this chamber. But even as evacuation alarms wailed throughout the crystal spires of Nexus Prime, Kessler realized that containment was already impossible. Her song had awakened something that had been dormant in the quantum fabric of space itself, a resonance that was spreading outward at the speed of thought, touching every harmonic structure in the galaxy. As her voice began to fail, as blood ran down her chin and her vision blurred from the effort, Kessler saw the fear in the alien's eyes transform into something else, recognition. They finally understood what humanity truly was: not a species to be conquered or controlled, but the universe's way of remembering how to sing. The last thing she saw before consciousness faded was the chamber ceiling beginning to crack open, like an egg, revealing the star-filled sky beyond. Her song had broken more than just crystal, it had shattered the illusion. That power came from fleets and armies rather than from the indomitable will to survive. Kessler collapsed to the chamber floor, her voice finally silenced, but the damage was already irreversible. The harmonic cascade she'd initiated continued to spread through the crystalline structure of Nexus Prime like a virus of pure sound, each resonant frequency awakening dormant quantum patterns that had existed since the universe's birth. Commander Dex Ravencrest of the Human Defense Corps was 3 systems away when the first reports reached him. The veteran soldier, scarred from a dozen colonial defense actions, stared at the tactical display with growing comprehension as the implications became clear. "Sir," reported his communications officer, Lieutenant Nix Castellon, her face pale, as she monitored the data streams. "We're receiving emergency transmissions from 17 different conquered worlds. Harmonic disruptions are cascading through their quantum communication networks." Ravencrest studied the readouts with the calculating mind of a warrior who had spent his life fighting impossible odds. The aliens' greatest advantage had always been their technological superiority, their ability to coordinate across vast distances through quantum harmonic networks that humans could barely understand. But now those same networks were turning against them. "What's our fleet status?" he demanded, his weathered hands already moving across the command console. 4 to 7 ships, sir. Most of them barely combat-worthy. Castellon's voice carried the weight of humanity's desperate situation. Against the Concordat's combined fleets, we'd normally be facing odds of several thousand to 1. Normally, Ravencrest repeated, a grim smile crossing his battle-scarred features. But not today. Today, we're fighting an enemy that's forgotten how to fight without their technological crutches. Across the galaxy, the harmonic cascade was wreaking havoc on civilizations that had grown dependent on quantum communication. The Veiled there found their crystalline cities resonating with destructive frequencies, their living buildings beginning to crack and collapse. The Kron discovered that their metallic bodies were betraying them, weapon systems jamming as harmonic interference disrupted their neural networks. But it was the Tilthrani who suffered most. Their hive-mind civilization, built on bioacoustic communication across star systems, was fragmenting as the cascade severed their quantum connections. Queens, who had commanded billions of drones for centuries, suddenly found themselves alone, their vast collective consciousness shattered into isolated fragments. "Admiral," came the urgent transmission from Captain Vega Ironheart aboard the heavy cruiser Defiant Spirit. "Tilthrani attack fleets are breaking formation across the Kepler sector. Their coordination is completely compromised." Ravencrest saw the opportunity and seized it with the ruthless efficiency that had kept humanity alive against impossible odds. "All ships, implement Protocol Lazarus. We're going hunting." Protocol Lazarus was humanity's most desperate contingency. Plan a last resort strategy that assumed the complete destruction of human civilization was imminent. Every ship would become a weapon, every weapon would be used without restraint, and every human would fight as if they were the last of their species, because they might be. The first engagement came at the Meridian Junction, where a Tilthrani, a Sol fleet of 300 ships, had been preparing to sterilize the human colony of Haven's Rest. The massive bioships, grown rather than built, had been advancing in perfect formation when the harmonic cascade hit. Captain Ironheart watched through her command display as the enemy fleet dissolved into chaos. Hive ship after hive ship began firing randomly as their bioacoustic command systems malfunctioned, turning their weapons on each other in a frenzy of confused aggression. "All ships, attack pattern Delta 7, she commanded, leading her small squadron of human vessels into the heart of the alien fleet. "Target their largest vessels first, maximum firepower, no prisoners." The human ships tore through the confused Tilthrani formation like wolves among sheep. Nuclear missiles found their marks on bioship hulls that had never been designed to withstand concentrated bombardment. Plasma cannons carved through living armor that regenerated slowly to keep up with the damage. But the aliens' confusion was only temporary. As Ravencrest had predicted, they began adapting, falling back on primitive communication methods that didn't rely on quantum harmonics. Local command structures started to reassert themselves, and the tide of battle began to turn. "Sir," Lieutenant Castellan reported, her voice tight with strain. "We're receiving reports from across the fleet. Human casualties are mounting. The enemy's starting to coordinate again." Ravencrest nodded grimly. He'd known this window of opportunity wouldn't last long. The conquered civilizations had survived for millennia by being adaptable, and they would eventually compensate for the harmonic disruption. But humanity had one more card to play. "Signal all ships," he commanded. "Begin the final chorus." Across the human fleet, soldiers began to sing, not the complex harmonies that had brought down the conquered chamber, but the simple, powerful songs that had carried their species through its darkest hours. Work songs and battle hymns, lullabies, and anthems, all woven together into a defiant declaration of human survival. The effect was immediate and devastating. Every human ship became a node in a vast acoustic network, their combined voices creating new harmonic frequencies that resonated through the quantum foam. Wherever humans sang, alien technology began to fail not through complex harmonic manipulation, but through the simple, impossible power of a species that refused to surrender. At the Battle of Crimson Nebula, 18 human destroyers surrounded a Kron battle group of over 200 vessels. The metallic aliens, their weapon systems malfunctioning from harmonic interference, found themselves facing an enemy that fought with the desperate fury of the damned. Commander Zara Nightfall, leading the attack aboard the destroyer Last Lament, sang an ancient Earth battle hymn as she rammed her ship directly into the Kron flagship. The explosion that followed was visible from 3 star systems away, taking out 17 enemy vessels in a single devastating blast. But the humans were paying a terrible price for their victories. Ships were being lost, crews were dying, and the harmonic frequencies that gave them their advantage were literally tearing apart the fabric of space-time around them. As the battles raged across the galaxy, one thing became clear: this war would end either with humanity's extinction or with the complete transformation of galactic civilization. There could be no middle ground, no negotiated peace. The universe itself was choosing sides, and the choice would be written in song and blood. The Nexus Convergence, the sector where 17 different hyperspace routes intersected, became the killing ground where the galaxy's fate would be decided. Ravencrest had positioned his entire fleet at this choke point, knowing that the conquered combined armadas would have to pass through here to reach Earth, and the remaining human colonies against humanity's 4 to 7 ships. The aliens had assembled over 4,000 vessels, the largest fleet in recorded galactic history. The crystalline dreadnoughts of the Veilthair hung like frozen stars against the void, while the Kron battle platforms bristled with weapons that could crack moons. The Telthrani biofleet swarmed in organic formations that pulsed with malevolent life, and the Frenary contributed vessels that existed partially in other dimensions, making them nearly impossible to target. "Final count, Admiral," Lieutenant Castellan reported, her voice steady despite the impossible odds. 4,312 enemy vessels confirmed. They've brought everything they have. Ravencrest stood on the bridge of his flagship Indomitable Will, watching the enemy fleet emerge from hyperspace like a tide of technological death. Each alien ship was larger and more powerful than anything humanity had ever built. Any one of the conquered dreadnoughts could have destroyed his entire fleet under normal circumstances. But these weren't normal circumstances. "All ships, begin the Harmony of Defiance," he commanded. "Let them hear what humanity sounds like when it refuses to die." Across the human fleet, 47 ships began to sing in unison, not the complex acoustics that had shattered the conquered chamber, but something simpler and more primal, the sound of a species that had clawed its way up from caves and still remembered how to fight with nothing but courage and determination. The effect rippled through space itself. The quantum foam that underlaid reality began to resonate with frequencies that predated civilization, touching the fundamental harmonics that had existed since the universe learned to sing. Arch and Quellex, commanding the conquered fleet from the massive vessel Eternal Harmony, felt the human song strike their crystalline consciousness like a physical blow. "Impossible," they whispered, their forearms trembling as harmonic feedback disrupted their neural patterns. No species should be able to weaponize the deep resonance. The first casualty was the Veilthair battle choir crystal anthem, the massive, ship, its hull formed from living crystal that had taken centuries to grow, began to vibrate in sympathy with the human song. Commander the Salon tried desperately to counter-harmonize, but the frequencies were beyond anything in their musical theory. The ship's hull cracked with a sound like breaking glass magnified 1,000 times. Atmosphere rushed out through the growing fissures as the crew, their crystalline bodies resonating with the destructive frequencies, shattered like wine glasses struck by an opera singer's voice. "Crystal Anthem is gone," reported the censor officer aboard Eternal Harmony. The entire crew, 3,000 Veilther, crystallized into fragments. But the humans were paying their own price. The destroyer Braveheart, pushing its harmonic generators beyond safe limits, began to tear apart from the inside. Captain Soren Ironwill, his voice adding to the deadly chorus even as blood streamed from his ears, held his ship together through sheer will until the reactor core breached. The explosion took out the Tilthrani biocruisers, their living hulls, unable to regenerate fast enough to survive the plasma fire. But Braveheart was gone, taking all 230 of her crew with her. The battle escalated into something beyond conventional warfare. The Kron War Commander Dexmer, his metallic form adapting to resist the harmonic assault, led a charge of battle platforms directly into the human formation. His weapons, finally compensating for the acoustic interference, opened up with devastating effect. The human cruiser Liberty's edge took a direct hit from a molecular disintegrator beam. Captain Ellen the Stormwind had just enough time to scream a defiant battle cry before her ship was reduced to component atoms. 350 humans died in an instant, their voices adding a final note to the cosmic symphony. But humanity had learned something that their enemies had forgotten: how to turn desperation into strength. The frigate Last Hope, its crew reduced to 12 survivors, ran directly into the Kron flagship. The impact shouldn't have been enough to damage the massive alien vessel, but the harmonic field surrounding the human ship turned the collision into something more, a resonance cascade that tore through the enemy's metallic hull like a scream through silence. Dexmer's death cry echoed across all frequencies as his living metal body was torn apart by harmonics that rewrote the quantum signatures of his molecular structure. His flagship, Inevitable Victory, broke apart in a chain reaction that consumed 17 smaller Kron vessels. The Frenari tried to use their dimensional capabilities to escape the battle, but the human song was affecting space-time itself. Their ships began to phase uncontrollably between dimensions as the harmonic frequencies disrupted their quantum anchors. Speaker Lumenthus watched in horror as her flagship, Whispered Truth, began to exist in 17 different realities simultaneously. Half her crew was lost in the dimensional transitions, their consciousness scattered across parallel universes. "They're not just singing," she whispered, her wine chime voice distorted by harmonic interference. "They're rewriting the fundamental laws of physics themselves." But the humans were dying too. The heavy cruiser Defiant Spirit took a concentrated barrage from 6 Tilthrani biodestroyers. Captain Vega Ironheart's last act was to detonate her ship's antimatter in the middle of the enemy formation, taking out a dozen alien vessels in a blast that lit up the nebula. Like a newborn star, the battle raged for 18 hours, turning the Nexus convergence into a graveyard of shattered ships and dying dreams. The space between the stars became a chaos of wreckage, plasma fire, and the screams of civilizations that had never learned to truly fight for their survival. By the time the worst of the fighting ended, humanity had lost 39 ships and over 8,000 lives, but the conquered fleet had been reduced to fewer than 600 vessels, many of them damaged beyond repair. Ravencrest, standing amid the ruins of his bridge, blood streaming from his ears and eyes, looked out at the carnage they had wrought. The impossible had happened. Humanity had won a major victory against the combined might of the galaxy, but the war was far from over, and the cost of their triumph was still being counted in the songs of the dying. From the wreckage of the Nexus convergence, a single transmission reached every corner of the galaxy. It wasn't sent through the quantum networks that the Conquered relied upon. Those were still disrupted by the cascading harmonic effects. Instead, it traveled through the ancient medium of electromagnetic radiation, slow but unstoppable, carrying a message that would change everything. Admiral Ravencrest, his face gone with exhaustion and loss, stood before the emergency broadcast station on his crippled flagship. Behind him, the view screen showed the aftermath of the greatest battle in galactic history, a debris field that stretched across 3 star systems, lit by the dying fires of alien technology. This message is addressed to every species in the galaxy. He began, his voice hoarse from the battle, but carrying an authority that transcended rank. Humanity has just proven something that your leaders have tried to hide from you. We are not alone in our desire for freedom. On the crystalline homeworld of the Veilthier, in the deep hive cities of the Tilthrani, aboard the wandering fleet habitats of the Kron, beings across the galaxy heard humanity's words. But more than that, they heard something else, the song that had given humans their impossible victory. The harmonic frequencies that had started in the Conquer chamber were still spreading, but they were no longer just weapons of war. They were awakening something that had been dormant in every species for millennia, the memory of their own songs. On Veilthier Prime, a young crystal singer named Melodia Truthkeeper heard the human transmission and felt something stir in her harmonic consciousness. For generations, her people had sung only the approved frequencies, the safe harmonies that maintained order and stability. But now, listening to humanity's defiant chorus, she remembered older songs, wild, dangerous melodies that her ancestors had sung before the Conquer brought them civilization. She began to sing, her voice finding frequencies that had been forbidden for 3,000 years. Around her, the crystal spires of her city began to resonate with new harmonies, and other Veilthier heard and began to remember their own forgotten songs. The effect spread like wildfire across the galaxy. Species that had surrendered their individual voices to the collective harmony of the Conquer began to rediscover what they had lost. The Frenari, existing in their carefully controlled dimensional states, started to explore new realities. The Kron, bound by their metallic conformity, began to reshape themselves into forms that expressed personal choice rather than collective will. But it was among the Tilthrani that the greatest transformation occurred. The hive mind that had controlled their species for eons began to fracture as individual drones, inspired by humanity's example, started to think and feel for themselves. Queen Heshkoleth, her consciousness fragmenting as her bioacoustic control systems felt her vast empire collapsing around her. Billions of drones who had never questioned, never doubted, suddenly began to ask why they had been born only to serve and die for their queen's ambitions. The human song is spreading, she shrieked to her remaining loyal commanders. It's teaching them to think for themselves. Stop it before our entire civilization collapses. But it was already too late. On 17 different worlds, Tilthrani drones were laying down their weapons and refusing to fight. They were learning to sing their own songs instead of merely echoing their queen's commands. Arch and Quellex, watching the Conquer authority crumble in real time, made a decision that would have been unthinkable hours earlier. They opened a direct communication channel to the human fleet, abandoning the complex protocols that had governed galactic diplomacy for millennia. Admiral Ravencrest, the Archon's voice carried exhaustion and something that might have been respect. We must speak. Ravencrest, standing amid the ruins of his bridge with only 8 ships remaining from his original fleet, accepted the communication with grim satisfaction. You want to surrender? We want to understand, Quellex replied, their forearms trembling, as harmonic feedback continued to disrupt their neural patterns. What you have done, it should not be possible. No species should be able to awaken the deep resonance. Yet you have done more than that. You have taught others to sing. Through the quantum static, Ravencrest could hear the sound of civilizations transforming themselves. The rigid hierarchies that had maintained galactic order for millennia were dissolving, as individual beings rediscovered their own voices, their own choices, their own capacity for growth and change. You enslaved them, he said quietly, all of them. You convinced entire species to give up their individuality for the promise of order and safety. But you can't enslave a song. Archon, music belongs to everyone who has the courage to sing it. On Earth, now free from the threat of immediate extinction, Ambassador Kessler woke in a medical facility where the finest human doctors were trying to repair the damage her impossible song had done to her vocal cords. She would never sing again, not in the conventional sense, but her voice had already accomplished something no diplomat had ever achieved. It had given an entire galaxy permission to be free. Madam Ambassador, her aide whispered, leaning close to her bed, the reports are coming in from across the galaxy. 17 different species are declaring independence from the Conquer. The Tilthrani Empire is fragmenting into dozens of smaller nations. Even the Veilthier are experimenting with individual expression. Kessler nodded weakly, her throat too damaged to speak, but she could hear it faintly. carried on quantum fluctuations that still rippled through space, the sound of an entire galaxy. Learning to sing in harmony without surrendering their individual voices, the Concordats' age of enforced unity was ending. What would replace it remained to be written, but for the first time in millennia, it would be written by choice rather than compulsion, by individuals rather than collectives, by species that remembered how to dream their own dreams. The war was over, but the real victory was just beginning. Humanity had not just survived, they had reminded the galaxy what it meant to be truly alive. 5 years after Vrede and Kessler sang her impossible song in the Concordat chamber, the galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. The crystalline spires of Nexus Prime still bore the harmonic scars of that day, their surfaces forever changed by frequencies that had rewritten the fundamental laws of physics. Kessler stood on the observation deck of the new Harmony, humanity's first diplomatic vessel designed not for war, but for the delicate work of helping newborn civilizations find their voices. Her throat would never fully heal. The doctors had told her that the deep resonance had fundamentally altered her vocal cords at the quantum level. But her whispered words now carried more authority than the Archon's harmonious commands ever had. The Tilthrani delegation has arrived, reported Captain Lyra Songweaver, a former Colonial Defense Corps officer who had retrained as a cultural liaison. They're different from what we expected. Through the viewport, Kessler watched a fleet of bioships approach, but these weren't the aggressive hive vessels that had once terrorized human colonies. These ships sang as they moved through space, their living hulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that had never existed during the Hive Mind era. Each vessel was unique, designed by individual Tilthrani who had learned to express their own creativity. Rather than simply executing their queen's will, the lead ship docked with elegant precision, and moments later, Kessler found herself face to face with something unprecedented. A Tilthrani individual. The being before her retained the chitinous carapace and multiple limbs of her species, but her movements were fluid, personal, expressive in ways that would have been impossible under the old hive mind system. "I am," chorus singer Velthara, the former drone said, her mandibles clicking in patterns that Kessler's translation implant rendered as musical notation. "I speak for the free hives of the Andromeda Spiral. We have come to thank you." The words were still difficult for her. The Tilthrani language had contained no concept of individual gratitude during the Hive Mind era. Velthara was literally creating new forms of expression as she spoke. "Your song taught us that we could be more than what we were born to be," she continued, her bioluminescent patches flickering with what Kessler had learned to recognize as Tilthrani emotion. "My people, we have built 17 new civilizations from the ruins of the old empire. Each one sings a different song. Across the galaxy, similar transformations were taking place. The Veilthier had shattered their crystal cities and rebuilt them as instruments of incredible beauty, each spire designed to produce unique harmonies that celebrated individual expression rather than collective order. Their music, once rigidly controlled by the Concordats' acoustic regulations, now ranged from the crystalline simplicities of their traditionalists to the quantum jazz of their most experimental composers. The Kron had perhaps changed most dramatically of all. Their living metal bodies, once locked into standardized warrior configurations, now flowed into forms limited only by imagination. Some had become living sculptures, others mobile orchestras capable of producing music through their very existence. Their society had evolved from a military hierarchy into something unprecedented, a civilization of artist warriors who fought only to protect the right of others to create. Even the Freneri, masters of dimensional travel, had found new purposes, no longer content to exist partially in other realities as a form of technological advancement. They now explored alternate dimensions as artists might explore new mediums of expression. They had become the galaxy's philosophers and dreamers, helping other species understand the infinite possibilities that existence offered. "The transformation continues," Admiral Ravencrest reported during their weekly strategic briefing. The veteran soldier had aged visibly in the 5 years since the war, but his eyes held a light that hadn't been there before, the satisfaction of a warrior who had lived to see his people not just survive, but flourish. 17 new nations. This month alone, he continued, reviewing the latest intelligence reports. The Dwarvian collectives have split into 47 independent city-states, each one developing its own culture. The remaining Concordat territories are requesting mediation to handle their own independence movements, but it hadn't all been peaceful transformation. The old order had not surrendered without a fight. Arch and Quellex, their authority shattered by the failure to contain humanity's song, had retreated to the conquered core worlds with a few species that still believed in the old ways. They had declared the transformed civilizations to be infected with chaos and sworn to restore galactic order through any means necessary. 3 years ago, they had launched the purification campaign, a desperate attempt to silence the new songs and restore the old harmonies. It had failed spectacularly. The free hives, the crystal cities, the metal gardens, and dozens of other liberated civilizations had united not under a new empire, but as a voluntary alliance of independent voices. The battles had been brief but decisive. Armies that fought for the right to exist as individuals proved far more motivated than those fighting to preserve abstract concepts of order. The conquered remaining forces had been scattered, their commanders defecting or simply laying down arms when they heard the songs of freedom. "There's something else," Ravencrest added, his expression growing thoughtful. "The deep space monitors have detected something unusual. The harmonic frequencies that started with Ambassador Kessler's song, they're still spreading, but they're changing, evolving. It's as if the universe itself is learning to sing." Kessler nodded slowly. She had felt it too, in the quantum static that filled the spaces between stars. The deep resonance that she had accidentally awakened was growing, spreading beyond the boundaries of the galaxy itself. Somewhere in the vast darkness between spiral arms, new harmonies were being born, songs that no organic throat had ever sung. "We may not be alone," she whispered, her damaged voice barely audible. "The song we started here, it may be reaching others, other galaxies, other forms of consciousness we've never imagined." The implications were staggering. If consciousness could learn to sing on a galactic scale, what might arise when multiple galaxies began to harmonize? What new forms of life might emerge from the cosmic symphony that humanity had unknowingly begun? But those were questions for future generations to answer. For now, it was enough that the galaxy had remembered how to dream. In the years that followed, historians would struggle to explain how a single human voice had brought down empires and birthed new civilizations. They would study the acoustic mathematics, analyze the quantum resonance patterns, and construct elaborate theories about the relationship between consciousness and cosmic harmony. But they would miss the simple truth that any human child could have told them. Sometimes, when you're in the darkness and you're afraid, the only thing you can do is sing. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe sings back. Viridian Kessler had stood in that chamber 5 years ago, facing the extinction of her species, and she had chosen to sing rather than beg. That choice had not just saved humanity, it had reminded an entire galaxy what it meant to be free. As the new harmony sailed through space toward its next diplomatic mission, its hull humming with harmonies that had never existed before, Kessler allowed herself a small smile. She could no longer sing in the conventional sense, but everywhere she looked, the universe was singing for her. The age of enforced silence was over. The galaxy had found its voice, and it would never be quiet again. In the deepest reaches of space, where starlight failed and darkness reigned supreme, new frequencies stirred in the quantum foam. The song that had begun in a council chamber on Nexus Prime was spreading beyond the boundaries of known space, carrying with it a simple but revolutionary message: every voice matters, every song deserves to be heard, and in the vast symphony of existence, there is always room for one more verse. The galaxy sang, and the universe listened, and somewhere in the cosmic dark, something began to sing back.